Chapter 6. Traveling through an ingressi is not for the faint of heart, or the weak of stomach. Think of an astronaut during centrifuge training, at light speed. The ingressi dropped me into a shady alley in Boston's theater district. I flopped out of thin air, landing with a thump, palms slapping the pavement. A groan as the nauseating magic that had made long-distance travel as efficient as something in a video game worked its way out of my system. My bones ached. I rolled onto all fours in case my stomach decided to revolt. I forced a few retching coughs, thanking God I didn't vomit. I struggled to my feet. My eyes finished reassembling and the world came into focus. I glanced at my watch. Almost dawn. I needed to hit the safe house by dawn or I wouldn't be getting in. The crew I'd bought passage from were more cautious than dragon wranglers. They'd sent dawn, and that meant not a minute later, which was fine. I had a pissed-off Crimson Glaive cleric and his pack of werewolf mercs riding my ass for motivation. The theater district was a solid place to lay low. Throngs of tourists and clutches of oddball drama club dropouts loitering on most corners at all hours made for excellent cover. I exited the alley like I hadn't just violated most people's understanding of physics and joined the rat race. The early morning foot traffic wasn't heavy enough for me to disappear into, so an outright sprint was out of the question. I hustled casually west, trying to look like just another random schmo taking in the city. I pulled up my sweatshirt's hood and looked down as a police cruiser slowly passed by. Mortal authorities and media crews were the worst groups of people you wanted involved in my blend of chaos. Neither handled the supernatural well, and the last thing I needed was a public scene. Most of the buildings I passed were newish construction. Gone were most of the old, irregularly shaped and spaced performance houses of the 19th century. Now the theater district's profile was an exhibit of glass and steel monstrosities. It was the world at work. Out with the old. It gave me pause as a guy looking down the barrel of almost 30. Sure, 30 wasn't old by anybody's conventional standards, but I'd been more living than most. Seen enough bloodshed and tears, prayed my fair share of prayers. The world seemed content in its ignorance. Maybe it was better that way. Blissfully ignorant. Maybe I'd share the fate of those old forgotten buildings someday. In a lot of ways it had already happened. The Crimson Glaive wasn't exactly the bastion of freedom it had been during my grandfather's run. But these days, hell, Rigid couldn't even begin to describe my former family. Mages like Abdiel were their prototypical cleric now, powerful, talented, driven, and unwilling to see the world from any viewpoint other than the Crimson Glaive's. I'd heard the Crimson Glaive had lowered their typical recruitment age to elementary school. It made sense from a loyalty standpoint. Get them young, give them everything when they had nothing, promise them safety, family. It made me sick to think even about how the Crimson Glaive had perverted their original mission. My grandfather must be rolling in his grave. I rounded the corner of 86th and 5th and stumbled upon a miasma of scents wafting up from the street meat vendors who'd deployed for the coming breakfast rush along the sidewalks. My stomach rumbled immediately. A woman in an obscene amount of makeup walking beside me shot me a look. I pet my gut. Haven't eaten in a while, I said, smiling. Friendly was always good, right? She rolled her overpainted eyes and hurried off. I assumed she had important clown business elsewhere. Daylight spread and I gave my watch an anxious glance. 8 minutes till dawn. I picked up the pace, keeping careful watch on the co-ed strolling out of the art houses. Sure, they were probably just college kids hungover from a night's worth of post-performance partying, but you never knew. Most of the Crimson Glaive's mages occupied that age bracket, some of whom could likely take me in a straight-up fight. And that was the problem. The Crimson Glaive wasn't after a duel. I'd stolen one of their most precious treasures. No rules, no mercy was the retaliation policy. A few blocks from the ingressi, the air soured, reeking of sweat and desperation. Tension spilled over from the oily shadows. I shivered. There was a name for areas like this, for places where dark power spawned from pain and hopelessness and hunger. Mages called them Fell Roads. The Fell Roads in this particular part of the city was a roughly 5-square block of human misery. People didn't come to the Fell Roads unless they had nowhere else to go. There was no better place to stash a safe house from prying eyes. So who in their right mind would follow somebody down here? I adjusted my hood to keep it from blocking my peripheral vision. The Colt's reassuring weight on my waistband gave me a slight measure of reassurance. It'll straighten out any nonsense you find yourself in, my grandfather had told me on the birthday he'd passed the sidearm down. Hey buddy, can you help a veteran out? A tired voice asked. A man with a stocky build beneath well-worn jeans and a drab olive jacket raised a hand by way of greeting. Salt and pepper hair spilled from underneath a dingy cap bearing an old Vietnam duty station designation. Money was an ongoing issue, magic or no magic, but this guy deserved better than the crappy hand he'd been dealt. I dug into a pocket and pulled out a Lincoln. Here you go, boss, I said. Thanks for your service. The vet's eyes lit up. He accepted the money in gratitude with a weathered smile and snapped a half salute. Thank you, son. Tougher and tougher getting by out here. I muttered my agreement and turned to leave. The vet's hand clamped down on my shoulder. I flinched and reached for my gun. His grip loosened. Stay frosty, son, the vet said. A lot of strange shit going around. Thanks, Captain. I slipped from his grasp. It's Sergeant. I worked for a living, the vet replied before shuffling to an old rucksack leaning against a wall beside an upturned milk crate. A block later, I found the building number I was looking for. My contact had advised me to use the service entrance, so I turned down the alley. My watch read 3 minutes to dawn. I'm not keen on being boxed in by towers of brick and steel, of having my movement restricted to straight ahead or straight back. Call me crazy. I liked having a little bit more freedom of mobility. 2 steps into my own personal hell was all it took for the hair at the back of my neck to protest. Traffic sounds came from behind me, skittering rats from the nearby shadows. I stepped around an oil-slicked puddle, pinched my nose as I passed a dumpster that looked as though Godzilla had thrown up on it. The alley could have passed as the nexus of every unpleasant odor in the known universe. The safe house door was only a few yards ahead. I made for the cone of murky light falling from the lone bulb above it. "Somebody looks lost," a voice called from the shadows down the alley. "Maybe you need directions. Maybe we could use some money." I regarded the voice, hand-inching for my gun. "No thanks, I'm..." Clunk! Something hard thumped the back of my neck. I staggered, raising my forearm as a shield. A dark silhouette wielding a length of rusty rebar emerged from behind the disgusting dumpster. My vision swirled in muted colors. I fumbled for my gun, but my fingers had gone numb. The club thumped me again, a gut shot, blasting the air from my lungs. The alley rolled like a rowboat on a stormy sea, but I didn't go down. The voice of the blurry figure laughed with amusement. "Tougher than he looks." The guy who'd clubbed me from the shadows tapped the rebar in his palm. "Maybe," Shadow said. I watched in morbid fascination as he brought the club up behind his ear. Maybe not. This wasn't going to tickle. I reached for the essence. I was going to make this punk pay for those sucker punches. I fell to a knee. The shot to the head was too much. I couldn't concentrate. "This is all I got," I said. Even mumbling rattled my brain. I fished into a pocket and removed a ratty $20 bill. "Take it." "Gladly," Blur said as he snatched up the bill and let it dangle in front of my face. "Thanks, but this isn't going to cut it. Check him." They couldn't take my grandfather's gun, or the winter's bite. Too much had been sacrificed on both accounts. Shadow frisked me with the beefy hand. He tensed. "He's got a gun." "Take it," Blur replied with all the mirth of an eager executioner. "The pawn shop on Alton pays top dollar for iron." "Not gonna happen, fellas," I said, groaning. I threw a sucker punch at Shadow's jaw and missed by about a block and a half. Shadow dropped me face first to the slimy pavement with a knee to the jaw. "Stay down, jackass," Blur said, in a tone that clearly wanted otherwise. My pistol's heft vanished. I'd had that gun since my 13th birthday. It had been the day my grandfather, Nathaniel Winters, had shown me how the world really worked. My heart sank. Shadow dug through my cargo pockets. Wallet, crappy phone, something else here too. Damn it, no. Shadow tossed the leather pouch to his partner, who promptly uncinched its tie. A wedge of light gleamed from inside the bag. The winter's bite bathed the dreary alley in freezing shades of deep blues, emerald greens, and ivory whites. Blur's bewildered tongue grasped at intelligible speech. What is this?" The poor fool had no idea. That was most people after the severance. When they came face to face with the essence itself, the IQs suddenly dropped. That usually meant people got hurt. When magical artifacts were involved, many people died. Piece of shitmonger or not, I had to warn him. "Here," I said, reaching slowly for the folded cash in my hoodie's hidden pocket. "It's like 2 bills and change. Just take it. Take the cash and the phone and go. Give me the gun, give me the pouch. They're more trouble than you want to know." "The hell with that," Blur said to Shadow. "Whatever this is, it's worth a fortune." Shadow's presence shifted uncomfortably behind me. I knew the Colt was hovering somewhere near the back of my head. "What is it?" Shadow asked. "No idea," Blur replied. Blur lifted the pouch over his empty palm, sealing his fate. I tried screaming, tried reaching. It didn't matter. Blur was dead the second he tipped the bag over. He just hadn't realized it yet. The marble-sized winter's bite tumbled into Blur's palm. For a moment, peace reigned over the alley. The blue-purple light thrown from the artifact danced in Blur's awestruck eyes. He was a child who had found his father's loaded gun. A pulse of light more frigid and unforgiving than the Antarctic flashed. Blur's throat trembled as the sudden frost sealed frozen breath into his lungs. Necrotic magic festered at his fingertips, and I watched in horror as ravenous frostbite consumed his arm. Shadow gasped, and I heard the shuffling of boots behind me. "Dear God, please don't let this idiot shoot me." Shadow's voice climbed a couple of octaves and was all stammers. "Hey, what the hell did you do to him?" I could have told Shadow the truth about the winter's bite, and about mages, and the Unity, and the Crimson Glaive. He'd just think I was crazy and shoot me anyway. Instead of speaking, I watched as Blur was flash frozen, the alley filled with sounds of Blur's blood freezing in his veins. Shadow worked the Colt's slide. "I don't know what you did, but you're a dead man."